Welcome to Medmarc's webinar series. Today's presentation is titled FDA Regulation of Artificial Intelligence. I'm Zahal Reed, Senior Staff Attorney in Medmarc's Risk Management Department. On behalf of Medmarc and today's presenter, Nathan Downing, thank you for joining us. Nathan Downing is a senior attorney at Gardner Law, an FDA law firm. Nathan focuses his practice on FDA-regulated clients. His industry experience allows him to provide actionable legal advice on a variety of health law matters. Nathan regularly advises FDA-regulated clients on regulatory and compliance matters. He advises clients on their advertising and promotion programs. He represents clients in front of the FDA on a variety of matters and assesses industry initiatives for compliance concerns. Nathan's extensive regulatory experience allows him to advise clients regarding a variety of medical products, including pharmaceuticals, medical devices, medical foods, and nutritional supplements. With that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Nathan.
Thank you, Zahal. It's great to be here today. Happy to speak on an exciting topic like this. Just a reminder that there's no legal advice, no attorney-client relationships being created, but I'm happy to answer questions and speak generally. A week ago, I was on a panel with cardiologists talking about artificial intelligence, and it was really eye-opening and interesting to hear a more practitioner take on it. And it wasn't focused on FDA. I was there to give an FDA perspective, but it was focused on the impact to clinicians, the impact to how they practice medicine, and meaning the potential impact to patients, which is really exciting when you're in industry because we are in AI, we're in the business of creating options for patients, but it's good to hear on the other end of what these physicians are looking for and the ways it can help. But we also know there's a lot of work to go from a concept to a final product that's going to be placed on the market for a physician to use. And a lot of that work comes from the FDA and the market pathways to get through the FDA. So today I'll be speaking on the FDA regulation and really focused on artificial intelligence in medical devices. So you already saw my introduction, but happy if you have any questions after this, there's my email. It's going to be in the slides. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to connect as needed. So some objectives from today's program. First off, what is artificial intelligence, right? We're going to have this sprinkled throughout, but it's really important to be able to recognize artificial intelligence. It might not always be so clear, or you might not always have a client who comes to you and says, hey, I have an AI product, help me get this through, or help me figure out the risks or the insurance or reimbursement or the myriad things that come with a new medical product. So understanding what is artificial intelligence is going to help you issue spot earlier. And then obviously one of the main objectives is how does FDA regulate artificial intelligence? You'll see kind of machine learning often brought into artificial intelligence as I go throughout the presentation. So, AI is just the broad term I'll be using. But when we're done, I want you to understand what are some strengths of FDA's position with AI and what are some shortcomings and how can we account for those strengths? How can we account for those shortcomings? And how can we better navigate the FDA when we're trying to get an AI product on the market? What are some challenges associated with AI, right? Often when someone comes to regulatory counsel, they need issue spotting. They need to know where might they encounter challenges, what might they have more resources to spend on, or what might they need more resources than they anticipated early on, because challenges are always, coming up as FDA discovers new things, as cybersecurity updates come along, as machine learning evolves. And so what are those challenges and how can we deal with them? And then I want you to focus on the fourth bullet as an objective throughout as well, and that's partnering with FDA. Oftentimes, FDA might feel like an adversary or in an adversarial position, right? They're kind of judge and jury all at once in our, in our reviews and our submissions. Pre-submissions, if you get a letter, come to our attention letter, an untitled letter, all the way to a warning letter, or worse, right? But to have a successful strategy to burn down risk, you have to learn how to partner with FDA. And so in the context of artificial intelligence and how FDA regulates it and understanding the challenges that come with it, I want you to understand how to partner with FDA to be able to take relationships to your advantage and use those to have more predictability. So AI is obviously accelerating. It's very, it's very hot topic right now. You're going to see it with ChatGPT. You're going to see it. You can write emails quicker, but it's also obviously in devices. And so this is just kind of an easy chart put together by my firm using AI that just pulls together estimated number of approvals per year. And really the takeaway is it's exploding, right? You can see the growth and you can see why would you not, right? If you're putting out a new technology that is meant to be innovative, well, you want to show you're using the latest and greatest, and that's AI. So that number is going to continue to grow. FDA's can continue to encounter more AI-enabled devices. And so more and more issues, more and more dilemmas and problems encountered from FDA are going to start to, percolate and wind up needing everyone's attention. And so, just make sure we're aware of what others are doing when you are entering the market with an AI device. So, earlier on, I said one of my goals is to teach you how to communicate with FDA or make sure you partner with FDA. And so I want you to put on FDA's shoes, right? As you just saw, artificial intelligence is exploding. It's exploding in number and use and capability, right? Does that capability always match FDA's capability to understand what's going to happen on a device? And so you've got to understand what FDA is trying to do is capture this, right? They're charged with protecting the public health. And so they take that seriously. And you can see the dilemma from an FDA standpoint, all the benefits that can come. And I'm going to read from a 2019 discussion paper, and it really frames it. And this is why FDA is so excited for AI, but it's concerning. Artificial intelligence and machine learning-based technologies have the potential to transform healthcare by deriving new and important insights from the vast amount of data generated during the delivery of healthcare every day. Example high-value applications include earlier disease detection, more accurate diagnoses, identification of new observations or patterns on human physiology, and the development of personalized diagnostics and therapeutics. Those are great benefits to the patient population, right? So FDA understands the value of AI, but that doesn't mean that they can necessarily keep up and always get the latest and greatest out. When I was on that panel last week, I kind of made the comment in passing that physicians want a device that does a lot, right? They want something that can help them more and more. But the more a device does, the more FDA needs to see it, right? The more the review could be. It could be a PMA, maybe a de novo, which is still a little bit more than a 510(k), right? But the point is, FDA, to put out meaningful devices, has to spend more time with that device, which could make the AI more stale. And it becomes an issue. And that comes to the second bullet point, right? FDA is following a regulatory structure that was not made for AI. Software is considered in it, but not how AI evolves, not the amount of data, not the intricacies of AI. And so that puts FDA in a unique position. And if Congress isn't acting, isn't updating things, FDA can put out guidance documents and discussion papers and their latest thinking on a topic. And those are all very helpful. But the structure, the regulatory architecture itself is not being updated. And then, once again, kind of back to my earlier point, FDA is trying to keep up with this innovation, trying to innovate and be a partner in innovation while still protecting public health. It doesn't help FDA to put out every AI product they can if some of those AI products are going to be more harmful than good, right? FDA is always assessing the benefit risk balance of each device, and that's no different when it comes to AI. So what is artificial intelligence? What is machine learning? So AI has been broadly defined as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, notably intelligent computer programs. AI can use techniques such as models based on statistical analysis of data, expert systems that can rely on if-then statements, and machine learning. Machine learning, which is a component of AI, is a technique used to design and train software algorithms to learn from and act upon data. So software developers can use machine learning to create an algorithm that is locked, so that its function does not change, or, and this is something FDA would really be focused on, right? Adaptive, so its behavior can change over time based on new data. We all know in the post-market space, one of the most time-consuming, regulatory quality functions for a company is change control. And an algorithm that's adaptive via machine learning can create a lot of changes daily, hour, even by the minute, right? Depends on how the data is input and how they're used. And so you can imagine having to approve a device that's going to go over many changes in its life before coming back to an FDA review makes FDA nervous, and understandably so. And so we'll talk later about some mechanisms to account for that. So why is it important in healthcare? Well, it's used to derive new insights from the enormous amount of data generated during the delivery of healthcare. There is so much data available, so much data out there. Implantable devices are constantly collecting data. Devices that sense, maybe stimulation devices, pacemakers, other cardiac devices, right? They're generating data from each millisecond. They're getting snapshots of an ECG or snapshots of neural responses to stimulation. All of those data give insight. And so it's important to be able to use those. AI and machine learning can learn from real-world use and experience and can prove its own performance. FDA in the last few years has focused more and more on real-world data and how can we incorporate real-world data into device design, into device approval, right? We all know that clinical trials often will have better outcomes than maybe real-world just because of the structure in a clinical trial that's not inherent in the real-world use of a device. And so FDA wants to use those, and so AI, ML can really help facilitate that. Manufacturers are using it to innovate their products to assist healthcare providers and improve patient care, right? That's important. It's important to be able to use any tool available to innovate and improve devices, improve care, which is all about improving patient outcomes, which is the ultimate goal of this industry. AI, and this is an interesting quote, this is from the Microsoft CEO, AI is perhaps the most transformational technology of our time, and healthcare is perhaps AI's most pressing application. And when you put that onto FDA's shoulders, you can see the weight of the world. So how do we use it? How do we see it in healthcare? You might predict post-surgical outcomes. You can see that a lot of marketing is meant to try to do this, right? We're trying to say, well, the clinical study showed X, and so we anticipate you might see Y in your patient population if you use our device. But if you have more data, you can get more accurate predictions, and more accurate predictions lead to more efficiency in the healthcare system, lead to more happy patients, happier patients because their expectations are being met. Remote surgery. Rural healthcare is a big topic, a hot topic, as it was discussed at the panel last week. I've heard it discussed in other conferences as well as, how do you use the skill set that sometimes is centered in an urban population? Well, maybe AI, ML can help that. Assist in diagnosing. Diagnosing can take a very long time. I was actually sick on Monday, and this is why my throat's going in and out, and I might need a drink of water. And I thought about, in the future, how AI could, probably be implemented to help diagnose what I had going on. I had a short fever. There's tests for flu and COVID and other things, but really test for numerous things and then start to suggest a treatment, right? So I could see how on Monday evening, as I felt ill, AI could play a role in my recovery, and it could play a role in my treatment and assist to make a more efficient healthcare system. But you can also see FDA's concern, and if my only touch with the healthcare system is this, whatever device it might be, that's going to diagnose me and lead me to a treatment, that's a pretty big weight that device has. And so FDA needs the verification and validation that it's going to actually assist in accurately, effectively, and safely diagnosing. It helps manage the overwhelming amount of data, and additional applications are constant in this space. We're always seeing new ways to help patients, to treat patients, whether it's a medical device or a convenience app. But in healthcare, AI and ML is just in its infancy, and it's going to continue to grow. So, we've really gotten a basis of what AI, what machine learning and artificial intelligence are. And so now FDA's got to come in and they've got to regulate those applications, those products using AI and ML that are a medical device. And so the evolving nature of medical devices that employ AI and ML differentiate them in a meaningful way. Obviously, very meaningful, right? If you have an algorithm that's adaptive based on incoming data on a daily basis, that's very different than the traditional medical device that are innovated in discrete generations, right? So you might have a pacemaker that the first model did, this, and the second model said, oh, we didn't consider this input, and the third model, and so on and so forth. That iteration, the iterative process happens over 20, 30, 40 years. Whereas now, you might only have one model if you have AI and ML on there, and you can constantly be updating it, and you can see the impact to patients. You get one generator implanted, and you can get the latest technology. You can get the latest thinking or the latest data inputted settings at the download of a new data set. Traditionally, FDA reviews medical devices through the appropriate pre-market pathway. This takes into account the risk of the device, predicate devices, product codes, regulations that may say this is 510(k) exempt or not. And so FDA is going to review things traditionally through a 510(k) process, a de novo process, or a full PMA approval process. Right, and those are really based on risk. Pre-market of these, the 510(k), it's kind of the lowest risk. It's also based on, the predicate device, which doesn't always give you the best answer on risk. But then de novo is, it doesn't have a good predicate, but the risk is more like a class 2 device or something similar to that. And so we can, treat it with those controls of a class 2, but we don't have a predicate. So we're going to have a little bit more in-depth review through a de novo submission. And then finally, the pre-market class 3, very in-depth, proving safety, proving efficacy, the verification of validation packages and clinical data that come into that are quite extensive. So, a reminder, a 510(k), before marketing a device that has a legally marketed predicate device, that is not exempt for pre-market notification, right? So when I get a new client or I'm getting like a startup and I'm trying to help them, we've got to look at a few things. We've got to look at, what do you want to say your device does? And when you're in AI, it's going to be really unique because your device might do a lot of things. And so the more it does, the more unique it is from those predicate devices, the harder it is to fit into a 510(k). But when you have a proper predicate device, you can submit a letter that FDA, and if you prove it, FDA can then say, yep, your device is substantially equivalent, and you can market that in the US. It gives you a clearance. There's different classifications and discuss that really goes around the risk of the device, but a 510(k) is really just giving you a clearance to say you're substantially equivalent. So if you are as safe and effective to a legally marketed device, you get that clearance. But once again, you can start to see if you have a AI-enabled device and you are trying to rely upon the 510(k) pathway, it could be difficult just from the outset, knowing that you're going to be using technology that may not have existed on these predicate devices. So the technological arguments on substantial equivalent gets more difficult. So you've got to be able to compare your device to one or more of those similar legally marketed devices and support those substantial equivalence claims. So if you're trying to rely on a 510(k) and you see a client that's an AI-enabled device, be very critical. Make sure that they're not just choosing a product code or regulation that only matches, a predicate, but doesn't really encompass the capability of their AI-enabled package. So here are some devices incorporating AI that were able to utilize a 510(k). Spinal implants have used some time for various spinal defects. A lot of these implants require customization, right? So they're going to be based on patients' measurements, their age, all the different biological data that they can gain from them. So a 510(k) clearance might be required to market that implant. But you have to look at what the AI is doing in that case, right? So it's allowing for a customized, not a custom device, but at least a customized device, a specially designed device based on that specific patient. So there was a little bit easier probably for the company to say, hey, this is substantially equivalent. Even though we're using AI to design it, these patients all should have ended up with these similar types of implants. We just have a faster way to get there, right? We have a more efficient and probably a more effective, if you will, way to get there because we're able to incorporate all these data points. AI has also been utilized to predict the outcomes based on dimensions and location of implants. So for example, back to a spinal model, where you place, excuse me, a screw, for example, and then the length of the screw and the patient's age and the patient's dimension, they'll start to predict where they think it'll end up. You know, in a year, we think we'll get this much movement or this much fusion. And that's, once again, utilizing AI, but you can see it's not so different that was done before, where they would still use predictions to try to say, hey, we should put the implant here because we predict in 2 years you'll grow this much and you'll have this type of movement with the device. So even with AI guiding the process, you can use a 510(k). It's just, like I said, a little bit more difficult. So de novo classification. A de novo classification request, so you've got to have to, prove to FDA that a de novo is proper, is a marketing pathway to classify new medical devices for which general controls alone or general and special controls can provide a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for the intended use. But as I discussed earlier, there is no legally marketed predicate device. Devices that are classified into class 1 or 2 through a de novo classification request may be marketed and used as predicates for future pre-market notification submissions when applicable. So that's something I really like people to think about in the AI space is you might hear de novo and you think, well, let's avoid it at all costs. A few things, de novo isn't too terribly different than a 510(k) as far as timing goes. I think it's 90 days for a 510(k), 120 days for a de novo. You do have a little bit higher evidentiary standard. You can't rely on a predicate device, obviously, but when you get that market authorization, now you have a predicate device for your future iterations of that. And so, it might be a tough road at first, but understanding what FDA is going to be looking for when they see an AI-enabled device, how difficult it might be to rely upon a predicate can allow you to plan better for what a de novo will take from a resource and time standpoint. And then you've set the pathway for future products. So here are some devices that require a de novo submission. A device that detects GI lesions. So you have something in your gastrointestinal system. You're going to use a device that has AI machine learning capabilities, that has seen different images of healthy versus lesion tissue over and over again. Reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness based on those general and special controls, but not a very good predicate. So let's get that going into a de novo process. Once you receive your market authorization, once again, you've got a predicate device. It relies on an advanced software algorithm. And that algorithm, like we're talking about, it's going to alert when an image contains a potential lesion. So that is obviously got some risk, right? If they're wrong, then that patient may have a lesion that gets missed. You could have false positives, false negatives. And so the de novo, the little bit higher evidentiary standard, because there isn't a good predicate, will allow FDA to assess that efficacy while still not requiring a full PMA. And once again, due to the mechanism of device, the advanced software algorithm, which is incorporating AI, a predicate was not available, which, for a while, especially if it's in its infancy, you're going to find innovative AI devices are just going to have trouble finding a predicate to rely upon. And then pre-market approval, this is the one that people mostly want to avoid if they can, because, from a medical device standpoint, it's pretty onerous. Pre-market approval is the process where there's a scientific and regulatory review that evaluates the safety and effectiveness of a class 3 medical device. Those devices that are class 3 support or sustain human life, substantial importance in preventing the impairment of human health, or which present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury. PMA approval is based on a different determination by FDA that the PMA contains sufficient valid scientific evidence to assure that the device is safe and effective for its intended use. This is where you get approval, right? You get a clearance, you get market authorization under a 510(k) or de novo. But here you get full approval because you are proving using valid scientific evidence that your device works. Now, a lot of devices, as I talked about earlier, right, when I'm talking about that cardiology panel, the more it does for those cardiologists, if it's going to help support or sustain human life, um, then the more likely it is going to be a PMA, and it's going to require more evidence, more testing, possibly long-term clinical evidence, depending on the indication and the intended use, which this makes it obviously a longer wait for that AI-enabled device to come out. But when it's released, when it's approved, obviously the claims you can make are commensurate with that PMA approval. So some devices that incorporate AI that required a PMA, breast imaging systems, results in breast cancer diagnosis. The risks due to misdiagnosis require a PMA under a product code of QNK. The use of a system that doesn't rely on physicians is more likely to end up as a PMA. I actually made the comment last week, again, not to go back to that panel too often, that a lot of mitigation, because the question came up, hey, how is AI risk mitigated? And I said, well, if we can rely on you in our intended use statement, physicians, then we can have a lower risk category, right? If it's just adjunctive use to standard of care, well, then the risk is lower. If it is going to consider the system for identifying, such as in this area, this breast imaging system, if it is the device that's going to detect breast cancer, well, obviously the risk of a false negative is very high, right? That's a risk to miss cancer, which could obviously end that patient's life ultimately, depending on, loss of treatment time and all that. So there, FDA requires a PMA because they want to make sure that the accuracy, the safety and effectiveness of this device is commensurate with the indication. Use of AI in this sense allows providers to differentiate between benign and malignant masses, which is a similar use of AI similar to the 510(k) products. But as I was discussing, the intended use plays a large role in classification because that's a lot of areas where risk mitigation can come into play. So a traditional review of MI of medical devices, FDA reviews, they clear modifications for medical devices, including software as a medical device, depending on the significance or risk posed to patients presented by the modification. So there's a good FDA guidance on this is related to a 510(k), deciding when to submit a 510(k) for a change to an existing device. When applicable, the change in a medical device would trigger the requirement that a manufacturer submit a new pre-market notification to the FDA. It's important to note, too, we're talking about 510(k)s, right? And you can see that a lot of 510(k) changes will come, but the bar for a new 510(k) is lower than some of the change control from a PMA. So you've got to think about the volume as it relates to your device classification. Under the traditional FDA regulatory framework, changes to software require new risk assessments to determine whether the change affects the functionality or risk category before releasing each change. That is, the algorithm is essentially locked and cannot change while in the market, defeating the optimization of AI ML technology. So we can pause there for a second and really think about what this does, the traditional FDA regulatory framework, right? They want software to be locked down. They want to know that software doesn't have bugs, that it's going to work as intended. Let's say you're in a surgery and you use software to program something. If your programmer breaks and that patient is exposed to the elements for longer, if that surgery is prolonged, that could be a major concern that FDA is going to have an issue with. And that's going to result, obviously, in complaint reporting. That could be part of a recall. All of those things that can really bog down a medical device company. And you can see, though, why FDA would be concerned, because if you're doing changes on the fly and then not proving that the device or that the change did not impact the device's safety and effectiveness, you probably shouldn't be releasing it. And that's what FDA is, after. However, when we go back to the definition of AI, and especially the machine learning component of it, you can see how this traditional regulatory framework will stifle innovation, stifle access to meaningful products that are the entire purpose of AI and ML. So, think back to putting yourself in FDA's shoes. They're working on a traditional architecture for regulatory review, whether it's pre-market or post-market, and they've got this giant wave of innovation coming. They know that physicians are going to be demanding it. industry is going to want to be utilizing it. Healthcare administration, if they can prove that it's more efficient, they're going to want to be taking advantage of that. And of course, patients who hear about it, who hear about the strength of AI, they may not really understand the full benefits of the compilation of data, but they're going to understand that AI is the latest and greatest. And so they want to take advantage of that. They want to have treatments that are able to incorporate this. And so FDA has to take all of this into consideration while still ensuring that the same risks of a software that is stationary are still present, right? So they don't want stationary software to have bugs and prolonged surgery. They don't want AI/ML software to have bugs and prolonged surgery. So the same concerns are inherent in all of the medical devices, but to meet the goal and to really realize the benefits of AI and ML, FDA has to try to bridge this gap. And so when you think about, I have a new AI device, and you want to start to think about how do I present this to the FDA, I always like to start with some of the market pathway challenges and some of the things that I see when clients come to me with a new idea, a new concept. Because you're going to go through an FDA review, right? We talked about there, FDA right now using the traditional pathway, but they've discussed and they've got some innovative ways to do things. We'll discuss later. But as an industry partner, as that, startup with a new idea, you've got to get some challenges figured out before you can even approach FDA. Because if you get some of these questions wrong, it's very difficult to then go in front of FDA and get any type of answer you can rely on because you don't have it correct at the beginning. So one issue I see a lot is device classification. And this can come in a lot of terms. And the first way I'll speak about it is whether it's even a medical device or not, right? If you are a small startup, the difference between being a medical device with the 820 quality system regulations and all that goes into it, not even considering whether or not you need clinical data or a submission to FDA, that's really onerous. If you're a team of 3 or 4, PhDs who've got a really good idea and you've created some AI-enabled technology, you want to be able to get that out as soon as you can. But you need to take a really good look at your device, at what you want to use it for and how you're going to classify it. So is it a medical device or not? That's really the first question. And I think if you're trying to avoid whether it's a medical device or not, you should feel a little nervous if your client's doing that or if someone you're working with is doing that, because if that's the first thing they're doing, then there's probably capability that suggests it's a medical device. And you can see what happens when it comes down to market release and FDA comes knocking and says, hey, we think you've got an adulterated product on the market that did not go through the proper processes, even if they just skipped registration, right? So really focusing on device classification. And then are you a class 1, a class 2, a class 3 device? How are you going to make sure that you have a regulatory strategy for this AI device that is going to ultimately lead you to market success? So if you want to say, well, I'm a class 1 device, I'm product code, whatever, that matches a regulation that's 510(k) exempt. Great. Well, does it really apply to your device? Are you really going to make statements? Are you going to make promotional claims about the device that match this product code, this regulation? Because if not, you can see once again, you're going to spend 2 years going down the wrong path. And you're going to be even in more trouble than you thought if you had started, even if it cost more time and resources, down the right path. So think about device classification. Then think about intended use, right? That really goes into device classification. But intended use, especially in an AI ML environment, can be very interesting, right? Because you might have layers of intended use, right? You might have a device that has great capability. And so you've got a device classification and intended use that really match the most basic usage of your device. And you're going to release it and you're going to control it in iterations. And then each one is going to open up more of your intended use, which is obviously going to require more increasingly FDA scrutiny. But if you understand how you want to approach your intended use, it's going to give you more predictability. And if you do that, you're going to have more success with FDA, because what I always say, when you're going in front of FDA and you're going to bring a new technology to FDA, you have to have a story. And when I say story, obviously that's not some fictional story that sounds good. It means you have to understand, and everyone has to be on the same page of what you're trying to accomplish right now. What is your goal right now? If you have an AI-enabled device that is meant to help find cardiac tissue that is acting up and ablate it in real time, then you need to understand that that's a very risky endeavor in FDA's eyes. So it's going to require a commiserate set of data and pathway. But that intended use is also going to help you from a investor standpoint. FDA is going to be very, excited about something like that. You might get breakthrough designation. You're going to follow a lot of pathways. So understanding your intended use and taking advantage of it from an AI perspective is going to allow you to have better FDA conversations, but also more predictability from even reimbursement and FDA's partnership in getting this on the market. If you have an AI device that's really about capturing patient data and predicting how long an appointment might be, right? Well, FDA is probably not going to be concerned about that, and you're still going to have value, but your intended use is going to be very limited to non-medical, non-medical uses because of the way you've matched your device to the marketing claims you want to make. And so understanding your device classification and your intended use at the outset, right? It's going to always be evolving, but making sure you have a story, making sure that you understand what you can state, and going in front of FDA is going to give you more predictability on the back end. And then we discussed this earlier, but predicate devices bring a unique challenge to an AI-enabled device. And so understanding the difficulty in finding a predicate device and making sure that you've got plans in place that if you can't find a predicate, you know how to pivot to a de novo if necessary is really important early on, because it's very difficult to get to a 510(k), to submit that through the FDA online application and then come back and say, we don't think you have a predicate device. This is not substantially equivalent, right? You've lost years of time and you have to start from scratch. And so being very critical of predicate devices is another challenge in the AI space. If you have an AI ML device, right, you want to understand what you can do in a change perspective, because not only do you need a pre-market strategy, you need a post-market strategy with your AI device, because that's where a lot of the bread and butter is going to come from, right? It's going to be the adaptability, the machine learning capabilities of your device that are going to make the market excited. They're going to help physicians utilize the technology and improve patient care. So while the FDA has already approved, authorized, or cleared, as you saw on that list, many devices, they continue to receive an increasing number of marketing submissions and pre-submissions for these devices. The traditional approach is not well suited. So FDA's traditional paradigm of medical device regulation is not designed for these technologies. So we've gone over, this is what some of the typical devices, right? I've talked about pacemakers and neuromods. In the 510(k), you'll see ablation devices and balloon dilation devices. But FDA, I kind of read from that discussion paper and action plan, they've outlined what's called a predetermined change control plan for pre-market submissions. So when you go back to a pacemaker, the change control plan there is the change control process is typically identify a change. Is it an annual reportable change? Is it a letter to file change? Is it a change that's a 30-day notice? Is it an RTR, a real-time review design type change? Is it a 180-day supplement? Right? All of those considerations come in, and you can see how each change adds time and money and over again. But FDA is understanding the AI ML space, and so they've implemented the predetermined change control plan. This allows manufacturers to predict algorithm changes and implement future modifications without requiring additional marketing submissions. And that is huge for industry, right? Your marketing can know exactly when something can be launched. Your business can know that you can do a lot more changes without having the expense of regulatory submissions, as well as the physicians can realize and the patients can realize these benefits sooner. So under a predetermined change control plan, manufacturers are required to submit a detailed description of the specific planned device modifications, right? They need to be detailed. They need to really lay out what could change and what the changes are based on and be very specific. They need to explain the methodology to develop and validate and implement these modifications in a manner that ensures the continued safety and effectiveness of the devices. So you've got to make sure that you have methodology that you can show the testing that's going to be used to support, to verify, validate these changes, and that FDA can know that if there was an issue, you would have caught it, right? So you need to describe it very specifically. You need to show FDA the methodology you're going to use internally to validate and verify is on point. And then you're going to show an impact assessment. You're going to have an impact assessment that's going to assess the benefits and risks of the plan modifications and any needed risk mitigations. And that's a lot of work, right? That's a lot of work for a team beforehand, but the work you save on the back end, the ability to get out your AI/ML changes earlier is a major impact on the business. So, and in just about a year and a half ago, FDA issued a draft guidance, marketing submission recommendations for a predetermined change control plan. The draft guidance built on that framework and helped clarify the types of modifications that should be included in the predetermined change control plan. It's also important to note that the FDA proposed that the predetermined change control plan articulated in that initial proposed framework be used for not only AI ML-enabled software, but for all AI ML-enabled design device software functions, right? So software is a medical device. It's software that's a medical device outside of the hardware, right? So you can see obviously there that predetermined change control plan can be very helpful. But now you can think about all of the AI ML enabled software that is not just software as a medical device, that is part of these implantable devices. We've talked about a lot today, neural stimulators, pacemakers, defibrillators, all of those things that are implanted and can utilize AI-enabled software, and the change control, the predetermined change control plan, and the ability to get out and utilize better data to better treat these patients in a more efficient, even speedier framework is really game-changing and needs to be taken advantage of. So what are some benefits to industry, right? Hopefully these are clear, but it's really good to hammer on these again, because if you are in the process and you are, getting your AI ML-enabled devices in front of FDA, think about pre-submissions to take advantage of this, because there's better predictability for the launch timing regarding the new versions of your approved or cleared device. When you get a new version out sooner that has more capability, still consistent with your approved labeling, you're going to make marketing happy, you're going to make physicians happy, and the most important thing is you're going to make patients happy. The cost savings associated with less regulatory submissions. Regulatory work is expensive. It's time consuming. It takes a lot of functions, not just regulatory. It's a cross-functional endeavor to get a regulatory submission out. And a lot of submissions have fees associated with them. So there's savings associated with having a predetermined change control plan. And then, ending with the most important thing, I keep trying to remind us all that this allows for patients to realize these benefits, this aggregated data, much sooner than they would if they had to wait for FDA review. So FDA expects as part of this, right? So we got this change control plan that allows changes to be put into the marketplace beyond FDA review or before FDA review. So manufacturers need to commit to transparency and real-world performance monitoring. They need to periodically update FDA on the changes implemented as part of the approved pre-specifications and algorithm change control and protocol. A lot of this is already done with annual reporting for a PMA product, but even more so, right? You need to commit to transparency. So to allow FDA to be comfortable with this, they need to make sure they're getting the feedback that there are no harms to patients as a result of this program. In addition, modifications should be implemented following appropriate, well-defined practices, such as good machine learning practice guiding principles, developed by the FDA, Health Canada, United Kingdom's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. The draft guidance seeks to enable manufacturers to market these medical devices with continuously learning algorithms without having to obtain a new authorization, so long as the changes match the predetermined plan. And then the FDA is providing the flexibility for devices while retaining FDA's oversight limits of FDA prescribed checks on the software to safeguard the continued safety and effectiveness of the devices. If you remember at the outset of this program, I was talking about the FDA's acknowledgement of the benefit of AI ML enabled devices, right? And this last bullet is really a way of FDA saying, hey, we want to help get this out, but then also remember what I said, FDA's main charge is to protect the public health. And so this is a way you can see FDA being adaptive, FDA being flexible, and saying, hey, we're going to work with you to get certain things out quicker to patients, but we also need these other safeguards in place because we want to monitor the continued safety and effectiveness of the devices. So how can you implement the draft guidance? Consider this guidance when you're developing your products. If you've got a client you're helping with, as an insurer, if you have a client who's going to be working on an AI ML device, it's important that they've got a predetermined change control plan in place because it'll give them assurance of if we follow these guidelines, we're maintaining and staying within FDA's staying on their good side essentially in the change control process while making sure we have internal checks to consider the safety and effectiveness of the device. Lay out your plan and your pre-market submissions and be prepared for questions for deficiencies. Your post-market team needs to be very closely associated with your pre-market team so they understand the exact gating items of what they can do and can't do. If there are a post-market change that doesn't match your PCCP, maybe you need an update to it, right? It's a continual process. You're allowed to go back to FDA with pre-submissions and make sure you're keeping each other informed of nuances and differences, and clear communication with your team and the FDA will allow you to realize these benefits. Partnering with FDA is a key. When you have new technology, making sure you explain it to FDA is critical. When you are getting into the realm of software development and you want to put together a new product, a new device, and you want a standalone medical or software as a medical device that's a standalone from any hardware, it's very exciting, right? There's a little bit of speed there sometimes, especially if it's a small team of programmers who have a good idea. And so it's important to understand when you have to go in front of FDA. So in the digital health context, there's robust innovation in AI and ML when it comes to clinical decision support software. And this is a topic I have a lot of conversations with clients about because it's a tool that FDA has put together that allows you to get out sooner, right? So FDA has long regulated software that meets the definition of a device, Section 201H, right? Very clearly, if it does those things, it is a medical device, including software that is intended to provide decision support for the diagnosis, treatment, prevention, cure, mitigation of diseases or conditions. Clinical decision support is described as a variety of tools, computerized alerts, reminders for providers, clinical guidelines, condition-specific order sets, focused patient data reports, summaries, templates, support, and contextually relevant reference information. So clinical decision support can encompass a lot of things. And you can see how a lot of companies can take advantage of these categories and get products out that can benefit healthcare providers and patients, right? That can be a lot of products. Well, FDA doesn't really want to get bogged down with seeing every product that fits within that definition, and you'll see why, right? So in 2016, Congress narrowed the scope of software potentially subject to FDA regulation by enacting Section 3060 of the 21st Century Cures Act, which you can see here amended a different section to exclude certain software functions, including clinical decision support software from the definition of a device. Now, pursuant to this section of the FDCA, software is excluded, CDS software is excluded from the definition if it meets all 4 of the following criteria, right? So there's 4 criteria that it must meet. It's not intended to inquire, process, or analyze a medical image or signal from an in vitro diagnostic device or a pattern or signal. So it's not doing these things. It's not acquiring, processing, or analyzing medical image, right? So that image, which is used to diagnose, it's not going to alter that. It's not going to analyze it because that would fall outside the scope. It's intended to display, analyze, or print medical information about a patient or other medical information, like a clinical practice guideline. It's intended to support or provide recommendations, right? So this is important. It's going to support or provide recommendations to an HCP about prevention, diagnosis, or treatment of a disease or condition. So if you have a client who is developing AI-enabled software, you can see the value that could bring from a recommendation or support standpoint. But it purely is a recommendation or support. If your software says administer drug now, you have to look closely. Is it supporting or providing a recommendation, or is it going beyond that and actually playing a specific targeted treatment role in this patient's care. And then finally, is intended to enable HCPs to independently review the basis for the software's recommendations. So the HCPs do not primarily rely on the recommendations when making a clinical diagnosis or treatment decision. I think number 4 can be very difficult for industry to sometimes wrap their heads around, because a lot of AI, a lot of ML-enabled devices, they have a secret sauce component, right? There might be something in an algorithm or something that they want to keep trade secret. In those cases, it can be sometimes more difficult to rely on this if whatever is inherent in that design, if they're not comfortable sharing, and if it's required to be shared to meet this 4th criterion. So, there's a very great opportunity for companies to take advantage of if they follow these 4. And you can see, based on an FDA risk assessment, how FDA is okay not reviewing these, right? The independent judgment, it's only recommending or supporting. It's not taking images, it's not taking MRIs that could then be altered, and then the patient or the physician miss something because of an alteration of the image, right? So if you meet these 4 criteria and you have an AI-enabled device, you might be able to provide some medical benefit, but do so outside of FDA's review. So CDS guidance, this is a 2022 FDA final guidance. It amended the interpretive framework. Now it focuses on explaining how FDA interprets the criteria that exclude a software product from the definition of medical device, which is considered non-device CDS. So these guidance documents are really important to assess the risk that your client or that your company may have in trying to bring a device to market while avoiding FDA, right? So you can look at the framework FDA has laid out and you can understand, okay, I can fit within these 4 criteria, or I'm not a medical device because I do these things, right? And then I always suggest putting that into a memo form, right? I have an AI device that I want to get on the market. I'm going to avoid FDA review, or I'm going to go to FDA review for a 510(k). I should be getting a good regulatory assessment of my pathway and making sure that I've got a good argument. So if FDA comes knocking and says, hey, we see your device, can we see why it didn't come to us for review? You can calmly and confidently share that assessment. So knowing these guidances and understanding what they offer is key for your businesses. So in these slides, I think they're important if you want to go over them on your own. I have some examples on kind of the way that these criteria are looked at, but they're not necessarily for us to go over now, but they are in there as a kind of a guiding tool in the future. So FDA's rationale for how some of this works is important to understand when you're writing those assessments, because AI is complex, right? So when you are getting into a new product development, or you're getting a client who's coming to you with a new AI-enabled device, you've got to understand what are the major issues, right? And I tried to walk through those in the slides and give you some ways to look at them, but laws and regulations are going to lag behind. Device classification, as discussed early, is not as simple when you have a device that is going to be changing, or when you have a device that doesn't have a predicate. Even if it's not a 510(k), you could still use a quote unquote predicate to understand your classification. But if those don't exist, you have a major risk to your company if you get the classification wrong at the outset. And then it's hard to prove safety and efficacy when things are going to change, right? So how do you go to FDA and say, hey, let's design a clinical study, even though in 5 years this device will be quite different, right? So having conversations with FDA about the complexity of your device is going to allow FDA to guide you, because if you have an idea that's going to help patients, FDA wants that on the market. Post-market sense, right? The predetermined change control plans are very important to take advantage of, because AI is complex and you don't want to be submitting a new change every 2 weeks because you are getting new ways to use your device. That's going to bog down your company. It's going to bog down your regulatory department and your engineering departments. It's going to cost a lot of time and money. I only have one line on here, but advertising and promotion is very interesting when it comes to the AI space, because there's great potential, but you can't sell a device for something that hasn't been realized yet, right? So you have to balance what your device does now and what you've proven now, and that's your current marketing strategy, and be adaptable as you move forward, because as other things come to fruition, as the data are aggregated and provide more value, you want to update your messaging to account for that. So how do you mitigate device risks when you're creating an AI-enabled device? Well, your software development needs to be on point. You have to have a quality system that is robust and can account for your software development, your AI development, your algorithms, the testing that's required. You have to have a clear story of your requirements, right? Requirements in an AI space may look a little bit different than they do in a standard device, but your quality system has to account for that. You need to avoid shortcuts. If you have an idea that something might take a little while, but it doesn't fit your business plan, a shortcut in an AI-enabled device may really be disastrous, and FDA is going to be able to review those documents. And if they see shortcuts, if they see testing not complete, you're obviously not going to get your device on the market. Cybersecurity, AI-enabled devices, they're using data, there's data transfer, they're obviously going to be some type of connectivity. So make sure you're following FDA guidance, you're being proactive, you're making updates to cybersecurity as new concerns in the market come to light. Physician reliance, this is a way to mitigate device risks, right? It puts the work on the physician, but the more you rely on a physician as you're learning about your technology, and when I say rely on a physician, it's really the standard of care. Is it adjunctive to standard of care, or are you meaning to replace the standard of care? Because that's going to change how your device is classified. FDA oversight. FDA review takes time, so avoiding FDA may result in an adulterated device, and so that may put you backwards, if even behind, had you just gone to FDA in the first place. So don't fear FDA oversight. Understand if it's going to be required and partner with FDA. So that leads me to an FDA communication strategy, right? So if you have an AI-enabled device, it's probably a very new technology. So you might want to do a lot of pre-submissions. So you might want an informational pre-submission. You might want to get started with FDA clearly in listening mode, just to make sure that you can let them know what your technology is, your fundamental science. And FDA can then have a little bit more baseline for when you go in, because they'll be in listening mode. Then you're going to want a pre-submission to clarify issues. Do you need an IDE? Are you going to have any other pre-market submissions that are required, a 510K or de novo? Well, pre-submissions to make sure you've got the testing right on a predetermined change control plan. Taking advantage and putting quality pre-submissions to FDA will give you a lot of predictability in the back end. Other opportunities, you could use a request for a designation, a 513G, administrative questions. You may be considering how to move forward with your type of device, or whether you qualify for breakthrough designation. And then always taking the opportunity for ongoing discussing the product during the submission review, because your AI-enabled product may be the first FDA has seen of its kind, right? So I like to reach out and say, hey, FDA, feel free to call. I may even get on a video call and do a demonstration of the device. They can see what the AI looks like, how it's incorporated into the product, what the physician will see, what a patient will see. And that can give them a lot of comfort and can go a long way in giving FDA the knowledge it needs to release your product to market. So obviously, be honest, know what you do and know what you don't know. Make sure you got the experts in the room to answer for you. Be on the same page as your team, right? That's why I talked about having a story. Your AI device is going to do great things one day, and so be proud of that. But make sure you understand that that means FDA is going to be looking for the matching evidence. Take advantage of every opportunity to discuss with FDA, and do not fear FDA. You're going to be in front of them anyways, so learning to partner with them early instead of avoiding them will be key. In my last couple of minutes, this is just a reminder of the post-market considerations that are even more unique for an AI-enabled device. But the government acknowledges the AI's importance, right? So they put frameworks into place. And I'll go quickly over these, but there's an AI executive order from the White House that kind of talks about some of the 8 guiding principles in developing AI. It's good to take note of that. Dr. Califf has really focused on AI, and he understands that there is a lot needed to help them focus on AI, understanding the great benefit that can come from it. And then FDA has put together the Digital Health Center of Excellence. I'm not going to go over it much now because we're at the end of our time, but look up the Health Center of Excellence from FDA and CDRH and look at what you may take advantage of. See how knowledge sharing is going to be promoted, and they want to see if we can innovate the regulatory approaches to the review of these devices. So in closing, AI, it is complex. FDA is using pre-AI processes to evaluate, but that doesn't mean you can't be successful. Companies want to take advantage of AI, but beware, make sure you're being honest with yourselves and you're taking the pathway that fits your device, not the path of least resistance. And always partner with FDA. FDA wants to get good devices on the market, and partnering with them will allow them to do so. I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I know we're at the end of time. If there's any questions, you can always email me afterwards. But as you can see, this is an exciting area, and I'm sure we'll hear many more presentations and what have you on the topic going forward, because it's only going to increase in its usage and in its importance.
Thank you, Nathan. So the questions asked in the registration process have been covered during the presentation, but there was one outstanding question, if you have some time, and that is, what are the biggest challenges when seeking market authorization for an AI-enabled medical device?
Yeah, so I think understanding the right classification is the first challenge. Because if you go for a 510(k), because like I've discussed earlier, it's essentially the path of least resistance, that may get you a kind of a creek with no paddle with FDA at the outset because you're going down the wrong path. But then let's say you're on the right path. Really identifying the testing required is difficult because your device is unique and you're looking sometimes at a future state. So if you're designing a clinical trial and a clinical trial is required, you have to make sure you're really partnering with FDA, design a clinical trial that's going to match your capabilities and claims going forward. And you're going to want to incorporate real-world device post-market studies almost into your submission process so FDA can say, okay, we feel comfortable getting you market authorization now because you're going to continually gathering those data, which prove the safety and effectiveness of the device as it evolves. And then cybersecurity and verification and validation testing, right? For a typical software or let's say a firmware, that of a implantable device, we know the testing required for that. Companies have been doing that for years. But now as you incorporate AI into that, relying on the old way of testing may not provide the evidence FDA is seeking. So understanding whether you need to have a pre-submission with FDA before even going to your market authorization submission is important because it's going to give you more confidence that your testing is going to match FDA muster.
Great. Nathan, thank you very much for your time today. We know your expertise will be a valuable resource for our audience.